Picture this. A 19-year-old terrorist, trembling with nerves, stands on a crowded street corner in Sarajevo. His sweaty palms grip a small pistol hidden beneath his coat. He's already failed once today. His friends have failed too. The mission seems over. But then, by pure chance, a shiny black car takes a wrong turn and stops just 3 feet away from him. Inside sits the heir to one of Europe's most powerful empires. In 20 seconds, this frightened teenager will make the single biggest mistake in human history. He doesn't know it yet, but his decision will unleash a horror that will consume 80 million lives across 2 devastating world wars. Entire cities will be erased from existence. Children will grow up never knowing their fathers. Technologies designed to heal will be twisted into instruments of unimaginable destruction. This is the story of how one bullet, fired on a sunny Sunday morning in 1914, created the modern world we live in today, and why understanding this moment might be the key to preserving our democracy for future generations. This is the mistake that changed everything. The world before the shot. Let me take you back to June 28, 1914. The world felt different then. Most people believed that civilization was advancing, that humanity was becoming more peaceful, more refined. Wars were still fought, yes, but they were distant affairs, colonial skirmishes far from Europe's grand capitals. The major powers hadn't fought each other in decades. In Vienna, waltz music filled elegant ballrooms. In London, the sun never set on the British Empire. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II ruled over a prosperous, rapidly industrializing nation. People rode in horse-drawn carriages, sent telegrams to distant relatives, and believed their children would inherit a world more civilized than their own. But beneath this polished surface, tension simmered. Europe was a powder keg, divided into 2 armed camps. On one side stood Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies. On the other, France, Russia, and Britain watched nervously, bound by secret treaties and mutual suspicions. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary woke up that morning in Sarajevo with no idea he would be dead before sunset. He was there with his beloved wife Sophie, visiting the recently annexed province of Bosnia. The Archduke was actually one of the more moderate voices in the Austrian government. He favored giving more rights to the Slavic peoples under Austrian rule. But the young Bosnian Serb terrorists who had traveled to Sarajevo didn't see moderation. They saw an occupier, a symbol of the empire that had swallowed their homeland. 6 of them positioned themselves along the Archduke's parade route, armed with pistols and crude bombs. The first assassination attempt failed spectacularly. A terrorist named Nedeljko Chabrinović threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but the explosive bounced off and detonated behind them, wounding spectators instead. The Archduke's car sped away to safety. The world thought it was over. A close call, but the heir to the Austrian throne had survived. The other conspirators, shaken and scattered, began to disperse. Gavrilo Princip, just 19 years old, walked dejectedly toward a delicatessen, believing the mission had failed. Here's where history pivoted on the smallest of chances. Franz Ferdinand, showing remarkable courage, decided to visit the wounded from the bombing in the hospital. But his driver, unfamiliar with Sarajevo's winding streets, took a wrong turn onto Franz Josef Street. When the driver realized his mistake, he stopped the car and began to reverse. Directly in front of Schiller's delicatessen, where Gavrilo Princip was buying a sandwich. I thought about this moment often. What must have gone through that young man's mind? Here was the target he'd given up hope of reaching, sitting motionless just 3 feet away. The car's soft top was down. The Archduke sat completely exposed, looking directly at him. Princip later said he felt like he was in a dream. Time seemed to slow. He pulled out his small FN Model 1910 pistol, aimed, and fired 2 shots. The first struck Sophie in the stomach. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. The Archduke's last words were to his dying wife, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." Within minutes, both were dead. The dominoes begin to fall. The world thought this was just another political assassination, tragic but containable. Newspapers reported it as a regional incident. European stock markets barely moved. Kaiser Wilhelm II was sailing on his yacht. The Russian Tsar was enjoying summer at his palace. But in the halls of power, old men with old grudges began to make calculations. Austria-Hungary demanded harsh retribution against Serbia. Serbia, backed by Russia, refused to accept all the demands. Germany promised to support Austria. France honored its alliance with Russia. Britain, bound by treaty to Belgium, watched nervously as German armies mobilized. We thought we were witnessing normal diplomatic pressure, the kind that had been resolved peacefully dozens of times before. Instead, we were watching the precise moment when the old world died and the modern age of total war was born. The unintended consequences. Within 5 weeks, Europe was at war. Not the quick, glorious conflict many expected, but a grinding industrial nightmare that would last 4 years and kill 17 million people. Machine guns mowed down entire generations of young men. Poison gas turned battlefields into hellscapes. Artillery barrages could be heard from 100 miles away. But the real tragedy was still to come. The punitive peace treaty that ended World War I humiliated Germany and created the conditions for an even greater horror. A failed Austrian artist named Adolf Hitler, wounded in the trenches, would nurse his resentment into an ideology of hate and revenge. 21 years later, the world would burn again. This time, the killing would be even more systematic, even more total. The Holocaust would claim 6 million Jewish lives. Cities would be obliterated by bombing campaigns. The atomic age would dawn with the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The hope that emerged. Yet from this unimaginable darkness came something remarkable. The world thought differently about war after witnessing its true cost. Nations that had fought each other for centuries began to unite. The United States and Britain forged an unbreakable alliance. France and Germany, blood enemies for generations, became partners in building a peaceful Europe. We thought we could create institutions to prevent such catastrophes from ever happening again. The United Nations, NATO, the European Union, all were born from the ashes of the wars that Gavrilo Princip's bullets had unleashed. Standing here, over a century later, I think about that trembling 19-year-old with his sandwich and his pistol. He thought he was striking a blow for freedom. Instead, he unleashed forces that would reshape the world in ways he could never have imagined. The world thought it was witnessing the end of an old order. It was actually witnessing the birth of our modern world, a world where individual actions can have global consequences, where technology can amplify both human creativity and human destruction, where the choices we make today will echo through generations. We think we've learned from history's mistakes, but democracy remains fragile. The forces of division and hatred that consumed Europe in the 1930s haven't disappeared. They've simply evolved. Today, as then, it takes constant vigilance and unity to preserve the freedoms that millions died to defend. The real question. As we dive deeper into the story of World War II in the episodes ahead, remember this. It all started with one young man who made one terrible decision on one sunny morning in Sarajevo. The question isn't whether such moments will come again. It's whether we'll be wise enough to recognize them before it's too late. Because the next time, the cost might not be 80 million lives. It might be everything.